On behalf of the programs that put together the presentation for the Native American Heritage Month, we'd like to welcome you to the first presentation of the lecture series that are going to be provided for this month. The reason for the lecture series is to be able to have a native TED Talk for our young students and also our people as well. So for today, we're going to be having Lucy Luevano and Arrow Coyote. They're going to be talking about Skolaskin and his church. Followed by this is going to be Rick Dizitel, Mel Tenasket, Randy Lewis, and I believe that is it. So to give you guys some background on Skolaskin, Skolaskin, the Sampoel prophet, religious leader, and band headman, had his church near the mouth of the Whitestone Creek. It stayed there after Skolaskin died in 1922. Before the waters rose behind Grand Coulee Dam in 1939, the church was reported to have been moved to Keller until the mid-1960s, when it was moved to the agency campus to its current location. It stood neglected until 2012. At several people's request, Andy Joseph Jr. included CBC asked history if we could at least get a pole barn over the church to keep it from further decay. We were able to get funds from the BPA and reclamation as a form of creative mitigation for archaeological sites eroded from the Columbia River banks to rehab the structure. We had just got the new fire retardant roof shingles on the A-frame tribal headquarters burned just across the street. If not for the new shingles, we would have lost the church. This is from the History and Archaeology program on the Skolaskin Church. So our first speaker today will be Lucy, right? Lucy on the Skolaskin Church.
Tatzlahain, Inamwaspanik Tatzla. Good morning, my name is Lucy Luevano, and I am an employee and a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes. And I'm here to talk about Chief Skolaskin. He was the last recognized chief of the Sampoil tribe. The Sampoil tribal members lived along the Columbia and Sampoil rivers. By 1850, their winter village population was about 250 people. Do I have a clicker? Okay. How do I do it? Does it work? Okay, Chief Skolaskin was born. He lived at Whitestone, but Chief Skolaskin was actually born north of, in a Sampoil village, north of Whitestone, closer to the mouth and tributary of the Spokane and Columbia rivers. His parents, I'm sorry, their names are, corrupt, but his father and mother, they passed away in the old village. And later on, he, sorry. It's easier for me to tell you from my memory instead of trying to read the paper. So Chief Skolaskin, he was born, and he was born to his parents out of a village that was near the mouth of Spokane River and the Columbia River. But his parents have passed away there, and so as he got older, he moved to Whitestone, and then also he would visit family members that lived at Dentilia, and that is a village that was up the Spokane River. And while he was there, he got really sick. And while he was sick, he went unconscious, and the people there um, said that he passed away. And when he was really sick, um, they they he they said that he died. The people there, and when he died, they were preparing his body to for burial, and then they say after 2 days that he sat up from the death, and when he came back to life, um, he woke up and he began to sing and preach, and he wasn't very strong, but it was thereafter, the following spring, that he regained his strength. And he said that when he was unconscious and he went and he saw the Creator, that he was asked about his what he did in his lifetime, and he was sent back to preach and bring the teachings and songs to the people. And when he did this, um, he just started, and then there was some people that believed in him immediately and thereafter, and then he started to get um, more followers and believe in him. But there was a group of non-believers or warriors, and they were like ridiculing him and talking about him, saying, "I don't want Skolaskin for our chief. I want somebody strong and physical," because after he came back from the dead, he was stricken with a limp leg. He could no longer walk up, upright. He was bent over, and he would almost um, look like he was really, really hunched over. And the way he got around mostly was on horseback, because he could get himself up on a horse, but he couldn't walk upright. But um, some other village members had told Skolaskin, "I've heard these people talking about you," and he told them what they said. And Skolaskin got very angry, and he rode out into the fields to follow those warriors. And one of the warriors was Swim King from Kartar, and he told him, by the night or the nightfall, the Creator is going to punish you for the words that you say against me, because it is not my words alone, it's the words from the Creator. And when you mock me, you're mocking him. And so all the warriors, they just laughed at old Skolaskin, and he just was angry with them, and he just turned around on his horse and he went back to um, Whitestone where he lived. And during that nighttime, that's when the great earthquake happened. It was on December 14th, 1872. The ground, it was on a Richter scale, it was like, I think it was 7.5, or some people say it was an 8, but it shook the earth. And the point was at Intiat. Some people say it was in Lake Chelan, but they're kind of vertical or parallel with each other. And so the cliffs there at Intiat, they crumbled and they fell into the river at that time, and they backed up the Columbia River all the way up, even up to Whitestone. And the people, they were really superstitious back then, so they believed that Skolaskin, you know, um, predicted that, that the earth would shake and the Creator was angry at them. And so in the morning, and after the aftershocks that happened all night long, and the terrified people, they all one by one the families, they went to outside Skolaskin's teepee, and he waited for each one of them to all arrive. And during that time, when the entire village was outside his teepee, he asked, the chief that was ridiculing him, Squitimkin, how many horses do you have? And he says, I have 100 horses. Well, bring me 25. And he did that with each of the other warriors that owned a large amount of horses. So by end of that day, he was not only their chief, but he was the richest man in their village. But thereafter, in Skolaskin, he was always prayed, and he always prayed what he was given, the songs and the teachings. And he told the people that the Creator wanted them to build a church. So that's when they built the church. It wasn't only a church, but it was also called a Skookum house, and that was a jail. And underneath it was dug out as a cellar beneath it. And that's where he would jail people that did not follow the laws that was set out before him by Skolaskin and the Creator. And he had really strict teachings that they could not gamble, they could not drink alcohol, and they could not commit adultery. And if anybody committed those crimes, he would put them into that their cellar or into that jail and leave them down there. And sometimes they said that he was really mean about it. And he also had lieutenants of tribal members that would carry out his tasks. And then also during that time, it was the close of the Nez Perce War. And that's when the Nez Perce people were getting ready to be moved here in 1888. And one of the majors, he was coming over from Fort Spokane because they were planning to give out allotments to the Nez Perce people and the Moses Columbia people. And they crossed the river there at Fort Spokane, and they came across and they stayed the night there at Whitestone. And Chief Skolaskin, he knew that they were there, so he invited them down to his camp, and then they had a meeting. He says, no, these have been lands of the Sampoil since the beginning of time, and I do not want to share my lands with them people. They are my enemies. We have fought in the past. And he was so against of moving the Nez Perce and the Moses people here, but the major said, this is what the chief, the white chief, has said that, and it's going to pass. You can't, this is no longer only your home. It's open. We're opening it as a reservation, and that's what it's going to be. So Skolaskin was so frustrated, and the next day the major was coming down here to Nispilum, and not far behind him, Skolaskin and his warriors, he was moving. He left Whitestone. Some warriors followed him. He got to Sampoil. More warriors followed him, and they all met down here in Nispilum. And at the big tent here was already gathered was Moses people and Chief Joseph people. And the major got here, and then he seen Skolaskin and the Sampoils come in. He says, well, you will sit over here, and Moses, you'll sit there. And he put Chief Joseph's people on the other side. He said, this is what's going to happen. And and Chief Skolaskin, he stood up again, and he said that, no, this is our land, and I won't share it. And then the major stood up, and he said, well, we're going to allow allotments. And then that's when they gave Chief Moses opportunity to speak, and Chief Moses just ridiculed and Chief Skolaskin, but the majors intervened and stopped Moses' speech. And he could see that Skolaskin was just kind of festering, and that he could turn at any point and a war could break out right there within that tent. And just about then, the cavalry came over the hill and came down into the meeting area, and the major went out and told them what was going on. And all of the cavalry locked and loaded their rifles, and the tribal people inside the tent could hear him. So at that point, Skolaskin just got up on, and him and his Sampoyo left, and they returned to Whitestone. And then thereafter, that's when they started making allotments from, it says Swawila all the way to Kartar. They made allotments for Moses and the Chief Joseph people. Later on, Skolaskin, he stayed in his village, and he controlled his people by prophecy, and he continued to preach, and he was really strict. He had 2 Sunday services. The people would go and they would pray in the mornings and then in the evenings, and then a couple of times during the week. And he told them that there was a prophecy that there was going to be a great flood, and so he was going to build a big boat. But those logs, they were, the people pulled them down, but the big boat was never made, and those pile logs were left there at Whitestone. But after that, Chief Skolaskin, he controlled his people, by his prophecy that he was a prophet. And the Black Rose, the Catholic Church, they wanted to go into his territory because that was part of the government's New Deal, was to kill the Indian and save the man. So they wanted to Christianize all of the Indians. And so they wanted the church to go in there and see which ones they could bring into the church. And Skolaskin forbade any church or any outsiders to go into his villages. So one day they were having a big gathering, and he allowed, I think it was Father Grossi, he invited him. He said that he could, it was in 1876 that he invited Grossi to come to the village. He says, you can come, but you can't speak. But when Father Grossi got there, instead of listening to Skolaskin, he went and stood up and spoke. But his words were like the wind. The people didn't absorb him or listen to him. They were faithful to their leader. And the priest, he left, and he reported it to the government. So they knew that Skolaskin had a strong hold on his people through being a leader and a prophet. Thereafter, the government considered him, trouble. And later on, one of Skolaskin's followers, or one of his people, had killed a Sincayus, a Moses man. And when he killed that man, he told they arrested Skolaskin. They brought him into Fort Spokane. And when they brought him to Fort Spokane, they told him, "Well, we're going to release you if you bring the murderer in." And then Skolaskin returned to his village, and he never turned over the individual that killed the Moses man. And the cavalry came in, and then they arrested Skolaskin, and they kept him. They imprisoned him. They sent him to um, McNeil Island, and then after that, they sent him to Alcatraz. And then he stayed there in Alcatraz from 1889 to 1892. And he was never convicted of a crime. He was merely just a detainee. But the American media or newspapers started writing about Skolaskin, and he got a lot of sympathy from the American public. And so in 1892, the government released Skolaskin on the agreement that he would go back and he would obey and follow the Indian agents on the reservation. And so when Skolaskin was released, he went back home to Whitestone. And when he returned to Whitestone, all of his followers had been turned to the church and had been baptized, and his wives had left his home. He had one wife left there that stayed with him. And then thereafter, he continued to pray and preach himself. But then, as he got older, he he went to Washington, D.C., and he still protested against miners coming into the lands. But the president heard his voice, would let him speak in Washington, D.C., but just told him that the purpose of mining and the Indian title to the lands was null. So he just came home and to Whitestone, and he stayed up there. And his last wife, she went to visit her relatives up in Dizitel, and so she left him there at Whitestone. And it was said that by Nellie and Johnny Francis said that his mother sent him, "Go check on the old man, Skolaskin." And so he left that morning and he went up there to Whitestone to look in at Skolaskin, and Skolaskin was sick. He was bedridden, and he had no fire, no food, and no water. So Johnny went in, cleaned him up, made him some broth, and tried to feed him. And Skolaskin, he said that although my followers are gone, he goes, "I was once a great chief and a prophet." He goes, "But everybody has left." He goes, before I die, I just want to cut my hair and I'm going to be baptized." And that's what he did. And thereafter, Skolaskin had passed away. Oh, there we go. Those are listed on the board. Is on the left is his siblings. He had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and on the right is the list of his wives. 6 wives and 6 siblings. And then this is the photo of location of the village upriver from the the Spokane River. Sampoil village. And this is where he lived with his parents. Or no, this is where he lived when he got sick at Dentilia. And Skolaskin was a prophet. And these are just pictures, Sampoil village pictures, and fishing. And this is Whitestone where Skolaskin lived, and this is where he passed away. Skolaskin died in the winter of 1921, and he was buried at Hell's Gate. Later, his grave was moved to the Indian Cemetery in CUNY Road. And this is a list of different Sampoil villages. These I found online, so. And the white man in the center there, that is Guire. He was the last, one of the Indian agents that worked with Skolaskin, where a lot of notes were documented. So Skolaskin is buried was buried at Hell's Gate, but later his grave was moved to the Indian Cemetery on CUNY Road, and that's where he lays today. The Whitestone Village was covered. Let's see, it was covered by water. So that's the current, but the village would have been down underneath the water than what it is today. And that's the history on what I have on Chief Skolaskin. Do you have any questions? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know, but the dates of their death dates kind of stagger. So I think they were separate, but with talking with some other historians, oh, I don't have their death dates on there. I was talking with some other historians, some chiefs, if they could support more than one wife, they could take on more wives. And sometimes when they did take on other wives, they became close. They were like sisters. So they would share duties of the household. So it was accepted. Yeah. That's all. And those are different villages. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. We really appreciate you coming out. We did have a good question back here. Did Chief Skolaskin have any descendants? He does. Are they still residing like in the Keller, Sampoil area? Oh, okay. Right on. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give her one last round of applause. I really appreciate you coming out. So there's a lot of reasons why we wanted to have this lecture series for Native American Heritage Month. And I know that tomorrow when your teachers ask you guys, like, what do you remember about Skolaskin? I know you guys are going to say what? He had 6 wives. Exactly. I think that's funny. But there's a lot more that I want you guys to take away from this. And I don't know if I've always been fascinated with Skolaskin and his tenacity, and he was a very fierce individual. And if you could imagine this way back when, he was crippled. He was crippled. I don't know if you got that from that story, but he was a crippled individual. But he didn't let that deter him from what his destiny was. And he was a great leader amongst the Sampoil people. And he never deterred from what he believed in. He always stood up for what he believed in. And I think that's what made people follow him. So much so that even against the American government, he stood up to the American government, the cavalry, and stood up for what he believed in, and that's why he was sent to Alcatraz. Do you guys know where Alcatraz is? Where is Alcatraz? Yes, it's in San Francisco, California. So could you imagine somebody from the San Poyo Valley, which is around the Keller area, going all the way, being sent all the way to San Francisco and Alcatraz? But he was sent there. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought this guy was a fascinating individual. Also because out here, I don't know if you guys know that, that's Skolaskin's church out there. And I hope is Leslie here? I don't know, the teachers, if you guys could take the students over there so they could see the church, that would be really awesome. So I think that since you guys drive by here every day, you should know what that church is, what it's about, who Skolaskin is, and why he's important to the Colville tribal history. And I think it's also important because you have Skolaskins within your own family line too. So I think it's important to be inquisitive and to learn about your family history to see if you have any leaders within your own family that you could research about. And that's the beauty about Native American Heritage Month, is being proud of who you are and where you come from. So I'm really happy that the students are here today. And I hope that you guys will conclude your visit by going out to see the Skolaskin Church today. And I think, Nanette, can you go take pictures as well? Okay. 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 All right. And then I want to say a special thank you for history and archaeology, specifically Lucy and Arrow. Yeah, Arrow. And I know I emailed Guy. He's the director of history and archaeology, and he said right away, you too. So Arrow, do you want to come up? Thank you.
PowerPoint on? So my name's Errol Coyote. I work for the History Archaeology Program, an archaeologist. And Skolaskin Church, again, I hope you can go out and take a look at it. We had it rehabbed, and my part in it was to set up the contract and find somebody that can work on an old cabin like this. And so we put out an RFQQ, which is basically a bid to see who could do the work. And we found somebody, an architect out of Portland, and then he knew a guy who did old cabins. And so they're the ones that worked on it. I just helped coordinate the process because I'm by no means any expert on cabins. So anyway, this is the church. This is the front of the church, and you're looking on the left of what it was, and then on the right of what it is now after rehab. So, oh, whoops. Okay, there we go. So, like Lucy said, this was where Skolaskin's church was at Whitestone, at the mouth of the Whitestone Creek. And that white dotted line is where the reservoir is now. So you're looking at a 1936 aerial view before the area was flooded by the dam. Closer? Okay. And then the other one is an old map that shows where Skolaskin Church is and where the creek was in the Columbia River before inundation. So these are, you can see that the cabin, the church, which is a cabin style, was not in great shape in 2012. And you had shingles coming off, you had all kinds of issues with the structure. So this is what it looked like before rehabilitation. You can also see the sign there on the side. It's a wood sign, and it also needed rehab. And here's what the ends look like. After it was dismantled and brought up here, it was remantled. I guess that's probably not the right term, but And then a chimney was put in, which was not part of the original structure. And the inside was not in great shape. There's a loft you can see, which was just an open loft. It was used as storage. Nobody really went in there and used it for anything. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. So the architect came and did a drawing, and with the helps of logs and timber, his name was Rogers, David Rogers, and he was an expert on logs. And so together they came up with these drawings and where the deficiencies were and what work needed to be done. And this was all part of phase one, which is dealing with the architect. So on phase one, we decided start at the top. So shingles were brought in, and special shingles were brought in from Canada that were the right length and were wood shakes. And so they put them over the existing structure of the roof, which is in pretty good shape. So they put in new shakes there, and they also put in some posts inside the church to support it so that people were safe. So it was interesting. It's going, well, how do you replace logs in the middle of a cabin? So what they did is they used supports inside and outside, and they put these beams in there through the window and created this cribbing to lift up part of the cabin. And then they also removed the old chimney, which was not part of the original cabin. The old shakes that they took off the roof when they put the new ones, they put them on the side there. You can see those on the side to replace any that were missing there. So the interior, again, you're looking at posts and then some cable lines inside to help the inside roof to hold it in place. So one of the things that they did is they looked at the old logs and tried to keep as much as they could, but what they had to replace, they had it tested and found out that it was white pine, which there's not a lot in this area, but there was a lot down in the Whitestone area way back when. So they brought these logs in, and they had to scrape all the bark off, and then they had to make round logs, square logs. So they did that by marking the logs and then doing some cutting and some hewing. And at the bottom there, that's Brian Monahan, and he helped do some of the hand hewing so that the logs would look original with the hand hew marks on them. And that's David Rogers, the log expert, really nice guy. He had some help from some local tribal folks that helped him with the cabin and raising it. And you could see at the top there, there was part of the log he replaced, but kept as much as he could. The whole log was replaced. And again, you can see the cribbing. You have the straps and the cribbing to hold things up so you can put the logs underneath. And here's some pictures of it rehabbed. You can see the windows were rehabbed so that they can open. The door was rehabbed so that it's easy to open and close. You can see that the logs where they were put in place. And you can see that they're a lighter color, but through time, they became the grayish color that they are today, so you can hardly even tell that they were replaced. And then when they built the new building here that we're standing in now, because the old A-frame burned down, they also did some landscaping. And you can see here on the side, they had a backhoe that was scraping some of the area. It's been replaced with rock. And it's just a nice setting for the cabin. And David Rogers also had an expert to redo the sign and stain it and make it look nice, put a little roof over it. So when you drive by from the highway. You can see the sign. You can stop and look at the sign. If you'll note, there's also part of a log there, and that log is one of the last few dendroglyphs or pictures cut into the log that are left in the area. And so that's what that is. And when you drive by, you'll see there's a big fence out there with all these designs on it, and those are from dendroglyphs that were actual carved into trees that are now gone, that were logged out or burned. And that is it. Any questions? Yeah. I'm not sure the total cost, but it was probably, I'm thinking $50,000 to $100,000. We did it in phases as we got funding, and then we figured out what we could do for that year with our funding source. So it was done in a number of phases, probably about 3 or 4 phases through time. Yeah. I am not sure the year, but there is one picture which I don't have with me, but was taken from 1967 of the church and the sign, and it was in good shape at that time. So I'm not sure the year it was brought here. Lucy, do you know? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. I'm not sure what happened to the logs that he took out. They were pretty rotted, so I don't think there were really any way of keeping those. But I would say, pretty much 90% of the structure is still there and was able to keep the logs there. It's interesting when Brian and I both got a chance to do the hand hewing. David did most of it, but we got a chance to do some of it. And he says, look at the hew marks and then look at the church, and you can see whose style looks more like the logs out there. And so you can, when you go out and look at it, and I hope you do, you can see those marks. And he used tools that would have been used at that time to make it. Yeah. I think when they moved it, I think what they did, maybe Lucy can correct me if I'm wrong, they dismantled the church, and I think they moved it onto somebody's land or allotment before the floodwaters came, and it was there for probably several decades before it was re-brought up here and set as part of the interpretive area. Yeah. How long did it take to what? It was over a number of years, probably about, I think it was like 2012 when we first started the process, and I think it ended in, I'm sorry, yeah, 2012. And then I think we finished about 2018 or 2019. So it was over quite a few years. The main thing was to stabilize it and get that roof on, which is a good thing because the admin building burned down. And because it was also treated with fire retardant, it helped protect that church from burning down. Yeah. Oh, maybe it'll come back to you. Anyone else? It should last a good long while. It's got a good roof on it, and they're new logs. The chinking was put in. It was, I think it was a matter of lime and something else that would have been used at the time. Some of that will crumble through time, but it can be re-chinked. And then just, taking a look at it every once in a while. It's locked, but we have a key and we can open it up. It's not really much to look at, but we're hoping to have more interpretive signs and maybe open it a couple times a year. And then redo that fence there and talk about the picture trees as well. All right, is that it? Okay, well, you guys go take it, when you get a chance, take a look at that church, and now you know the history. So, great, thank you.